I'm not sure that horrific covers it. This is sheer madness.
He's referring to the case where 4 mentally disabled people were found kept in dungeon-like conditions in a basement in Philadelphia, mistreated and tortured. And now police allege their captor is a convicted killer out on parole. How could this happen? What penalty should face the kidnapper? And who's to blame? Tell us what you think about the so-called Dungeon of Horrors right now on It's Your Call. The conditions were deplorable, the abuse horrific, and the victims all mentally challenged. So how could this happen? That's just one of the questions we're asking this hour. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lynn Doyle. Our topic today is a distressing one, and I'm afraid will involve graphic conversation about abuse of the mentally disabled. We're talking about the so-called Dungeon of Horrors that was discovered by police in the basement of a Philadelphia row home. 4 mentally disabled individuals who had been missing from various parts of the country are now recovering from what police and social workers say was horrific abuse. They were allegedly held captive, were tortured, and nearly starved to death by a convicted killer, allegedly Linda Ann Weston and a band of her accomplices. Her motive? Well, investigators say it was money. They say she took their disability checks and then abused them to keep them all in line. Now advocates for the disabled and, of course, everyone else across the country are asking, how could this happen? And I'm asking you what you think should happen to the accused if, in fact, they are found guilty. If you want to tell us what you think, you can start emailing me your thoughts right now. I'm at lynn@lynndoyle.net. We're going to be hearing from you in just a few moments, but first we're going to go to the telephone lines where we're joined by Stephen Wigriser, who is the Wanamaker family attorney. Their daughter, Tamara Breeden, was one of the 4 captives allegedly held in Philadelphia by Linda Ann Weston and others. Mr. Wigriser, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Lynn.
First and foremost, can you tell us how Tamara is doing according to what her family has told you?
Tamara is doing better. Of course, that's a relative term. She was, as everyone knows, horribly abused and neglected. She was malnourished, and she has a number of injuries that you would expect given her treatment. She was clearly beaten and tortured and tormented for years. And of course, those are just the physical injuries. I would certainly want to defer to the mental health professionals who will be caring for her. But it would be shocking to me if she didn't have a whole range of ongoing psychological and emotional problems as well.
I can only imagine how horrible this has been for those who love her and who have been missing her in her absence. What about her family and her parents, whom you represent? What's their reaction been to all of this?
Well, as you can imagine, their emotions have ranged from elation at her discovery to anger, and of course, like all of us, they were horrified when they began to understand the circumstances of her disappearance and what she went through over these years. So it's a range of emotions. It's continuing. We have to keep in mind that this case is just 12 days old, and obviously they're going to go through a period of adjustment and accommodation as well.
What does the family hope will happen moving forward from this day?
Well, first and foremost, they're concerned about Tamara's health and the health of her children. And I think at this point we can be confident and comfortable that she is well taken care of. She has access to the medical services that she needs. Certainly she's in an appropriate, safe, and secure and caring environment, and there's no issues of malnourishment, and her needs are certainly going to be met. Thereafter, like all of us, they're interested in justice. They want to see this Weston gang brought to justice just as quickly as possible.
All right, Stephen Wigreiser, thank you so much. He is the attorney for the family of one of the captives. We certainly appreciate your perspective on this case, and we wish the best of luck to Tamara and her family.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you. We continue now with Mike Newell, who is a staff writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He has been the lead reporter for the Inquirer during its continued coverage of this story, and he is going to now provide us with the latest information. Mike, this is a story that people have been watching all over the country, and the reaction has to be the same uniformly. People are just absolutely amazed and shocked by this.
Yeah, I think you're even seeing that in hardened Philadelphia investigators. Everyone right now is just, including us at the paper, trying to track down this woman's path since she's gotten out of prison back in the 1980s to now. What stage? So I think there are 6 states now involved. Investigators are poring over evidence, trying to find out exactly how many victims she has, how many people she has hurt, and where exactly she lived, when and where, and who was with her at the time.
So it's not just these 4 individuals who were rescued most recently, but police speculate that there could be other victims all across the country? Yeah,
well, some victims have stepped forward and told similar tales, being locked in attics and basements and closets by Linda Weston. Police recovered, according to Commissioner Ramsey, about 50 pieces of identification or pieces of paperwork linking Linda to different, who they believe may be victims. So right now, it really is a task of just putting that timeline together, perhaps crossing 2 decades of, who this woman was in touch with, how she found her victims, and exactly how she, was able to manipulate the system for so long.
And the allegation is that she did manipulate the system, and it was money that was her motivating force?
Yeah, on all fronts: Social Security, welfare, benefit checks, for mentally challenged adults to infants, teenagers, and children, getting their checks and taking that money from them.
You dubbed it as a reign of terror. Other people have called it the dungeon of horrors, and other very graphic descriptions of what went on there. But a reign of terror sounds like, if in fact she is guilty of this, is exactly what it is.
Well, that's what's most frightening. First, she starved the man to death in her apartment back in the 80s and was out of prison in about 4 years. And then from that point on, or sometime shortly after that, seemed to be using safeguard systems to her advantage to manipulate children and mentally challenged adults. So it's very frightening.
And in fact, we have heard reports that she allegedly mistreated her own family members. There were allegations of torture, of abuse, and even incest made by some members of her family, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, her own brothers and sisters have detailed in pretty graphic and hard-to-take terms about what their child life was like under Linda. Her own children have talked about being locked in closets, chained, taken out of school, beaten with cords and sticks. There's a lot of questions of sexual abuse between her and her own brothers and sisters and her children. And also these other suspects who she's brought into her life. There are questions that there might have been some abuse going on there as well.
We're going to talk further about that in just a moment, but I do want to invite our viewers to be part of the discussion as well. Now that you've heard the basics of the story, we want to give you a chance to react with your thoughts. Do you think the disabled are often overlooked by government agencies and perhaps their families, and that's why this happened? Or is it because a convicted killer was off the radar screen? And what do you think should happen to those accused of these abuses if, in fact, they are convicted? If you want to join in, you can email me directly at lynn@lynndoyle.net. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. For more reaction and insight to those questions and more, let's bring in our remaining panelist. Dr. Sue Kornbluth is a psychology professor at Temple University. She is the National Foster Care and Adoption expert for www.examiner.com, which is an online newspaper, and she's also the author of The Ambiguous Foster Child: Attachment, Separation, Loss, and Loyalty. And we're also joined by Audrey Kochia, who is the founder and the executive director for Vision for Equality, an organization for people with disabilities and their family members. It provides advocacy, monitoring, and training. Ladies, thank you so much for joining our discussion. I can only imagine that as professionals in this field, you were just absolutely heartbroken and saddened to hear of this case.
I was completely enraged when I had heard about